I walked into a church and saw my own photo surrounded by flowers and people crying over my death. But I was standing right there, very much alive, about to expose the biggest betrayal of my life. You guys, 3 months ago I woke up from a coma to discover my father had been collecting my life insurance money. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what he did when he found out I was still alive. By the end of this story, you'll understand why 13 people called me in panic at 6 a.m. last Sunday and why my father is currently in prison. But first, let me explain how I ended up attending my own funeral. For context, I had been working as a nurse at City General Hospital for about 4 years. Not the most glamorous job, TBH, but I loved helping people, and the pay was decent enough that I could afford my own apartment and wasn't living off ramen noodles like most people my age. My relationship with my dad had always been complicated, but things got really weird after my grandmother passed away last year. She left me her house in her will, which was honestly a shock because I didn't think she had much money. The house wasn't huge or anything, but it was in a good neighborhood and completely paid off. My dad was not happy about this, like at all. He kept pressuring me to sell the house and split the money with him and my stepmother, Linda. Every family dinner turned into this awkward conversation about how I was being selfish and ungrateful. Classic guilt trip stuff that I'm sure some of you can relate to. But here's where it gets really messed up. I found out my dad had been stealing from my grandmother while she was sick. He had power of attorney and had been transferring money from her accounts to his own. When I threatened to report him to the police, he literally told me I would regret crossing him. I thought he meant like he'd stop talking to me or whatever. I never imagined he'd let me stay dead for 3 months. So anyway, 3 months ago, I was driving home from a night shift at the hospital. It was like 2 a.m., raining super hard, and I was exhausted from dealing with one emergency after another. The last thing I remember was seeing headlights coming straight at me from the wrong side of the road. Then nothing. Complete blackness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed in a different city about 3 hours away from home. The first person I saw was Dr. Martinez, this really kind woman who had apparently been taking care of me for weeks. She told me I'd been in a coma for 3 months after a severe car accident. Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, traumatic brain injury. Basically, I was lucky to be alive. But here's the weird part that should have been a red flag. No one had come to visit me. Not my dad, not my stepmother, nobody. Dr. Martinez said they tried to contact my emergency contacts multiple times, but my father claimed he couldn't afford to travel to see me. My father, who literally owns 3 restaurants and drives a BMW that costs more than most people's annual salary. The hospital social worker, Maria, who became like a second mom to me during recovery, helped me figure out what had happened. Apparently, there had been some mix-up with my identification after the accident. The other driver, who was drunk, died at the scene. His insurance company initially listed me as deceased too. Maria showed me the newspaper clipping from my hometown, and you guys, I literally couldn't believe what I was reading. There was my obituary. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, beloved daughter, passed away tragically in a car accident at age 28. It talked about my love for helping others, my career as a nurse, and said I was survived by my father, David Thompson, and stepmother, Linda Thompson. What it didn't mention was that we'd been fighting for months before the accident. As I was recovering in that hospital room, miles away from home, I started putting the pieces together. The insurance mix-up had given my father the perfect opportunity to get rid of me permanently. If I was legally dead, he could contest my grandmother's will and claim the house should go to him. Maria helped me contact a lawyer, and what we discovered literally made my blood run cold. My father had already filed paperwork to claim my grandmother's house. He'd also collected my life insurance policy, a policy I didn't even remember having because apparently he'd taken it out on me years ago when I started working as a nurse. The payout was $250,000. But wait, it gets worse. He'd also cleaned out my bank accounts, sold my totaled car for scrap, and gotten rid of all my personal belongings from my apartment. My father hadn't just let me stay dead, he'd literally profited from my death. I spent weeks planning my return with the lawyer's help. We needed evidence, and we needed to catch him in the act. That's when Maria told me about the memorial service. 3 months after the accident, my father was planning a memorial service for me at St. Mary's Church. According to the newspaper announcement, it was going to be a celebration of Sarah's life and her dedication to helping others. The announcement asked for donations to a Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund that would supposedly help train new nurses. Spoiler alert, there was no such fund. The donations were going straight into my father's pocket. I knew this was my chance to expose everything, but I had no idea that walking into that church would trigger a chain of events that would end with my father threatening my life and 13 panicked phone calls. More on that later. First, let me tell you about the most awkward family reunion in history. First update. Okay, so I've gotten like 1,000 messages asking what happened at the memorial service. So here's part 1 of this absolutely insane story. The day of the service, I drove the 3 hours back to my hometown. I'd lost weight during recovery, and my hair had grown longer, so I looked different enough that I hoped people wouldn't recognize me immediately. I wore sunglasses and a black dress Maria had lent me. You guys, St. Mary's Church was packed. Cars lined the street for blocks. I couldn't believe how many people had come to mourn someone who wasn't even dead. I walked up the steps and could see through the glass doors that the altar was decorated with white lilies and my high school graduation photo blown up to poster size. People were signing a guest book and writing messages. It was honestly surreal. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The smell of flowers hit me immediately. There were arrangements everywhere. It was beautiful, but also completely overwhelming, like walking into the world's saddest garden. Then I saw my father. He was standing at the front of the church in an expensive black suit I'd never seen before, shaking hands with people and accepting condolences with this perfectly rehearsed, sad expression. My stepmother Linda was next to him, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief like she was auditioning for a soap opera. I hid behind a pillar and just watched them for several minutes. Person after person came up to offer sympathy, and my father would nod solemnly, sometimes putting his hand over his heart like he was too overcome with grief to speak. "She was such a light in this world," I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson from down the street. "I just don't know how I'll go on without her." Linda chimed in with, "She would have wanted us to be strong. That's just the kind of person Sarah was." I literally felt sick. These people who had let me stay dead for 3 months, who had profited from my supposed death, were standing there accepting sympathy like they were grieving family members. That's when I noticed the donation box. It was this beautiful wooden box with a sign that read, "Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund, helping train the next generation of nurses." People were dropping envelopes and cash into it. I watched an elderly man put what looked like a $100 bill through the opening. All of that money was going directly to my father. I was honestly shaking with anger at this point. I moved closer to hear what people were saying about me. My old high school teacher, Mr. Peterson, was telling someone, Sarah always had such a kind heart. Even as a teenager, she was always volunteering at the animal shelter. She was the one who took care of her grandmother in those final months, another person added. Never missed a doctor's appointment. It was weird and heartbreaking to hear my own eulogy while standing there alive. These people remembered the real me, but then I heard something that made my blood boil. "It's such a shame about the fight she was having with her father before she died," Mrs. Conway whispered to another mourner. "David told me she had become very bitter and greedy after her grandmother passed. He said she was trying to keep him from his inheritance. My father had been spreading lies about me even in death, trying to destroy my reputation to cover up his own crimes. I couldn't take it anymore. I started walking toward the front of the church, but then the service began, and I froze. My father stood up and walked to the podium. The church went silent as he looked out over the crowd with fake emotion. "Thank you all for coming today to honor my daughter Sarah," he began, his voice shaking with practiced grief. "Sarah was the light of my life. From the day she was born, she brought joy and purpose to everything she touched. I watched in complete amazement as this man who had let me stay dead for 3 months stood there and lied to a church full of people. Sarah chose to become a nurse because she wanted to help people. She would stay late at the hospital, making sure every patient felt cared for." He paused to collect himself. Oscar-worthy performance, honestly, and continued, "I know Sarah is looking down on us today, and I know she would want us to continue her legacy. That's why Linda and I have established the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund." The crowd nodded and murmured approval. Several people reached for their wallets. "Sarah, my beautiful daughter, I miss you more than words can express. I wish I could have said goodbye. I wish I could have told you one more time how much I loved you." That's when I stepped out of the shadows. "Well, Dad," I said in a voice that carried across the silent church, "here's your chance." What happened next was absolute chaos, but the real drama didn't start until after the police arrested him. That's when my father's true colors came out, and that's when I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Second update, the reaction was immediate and absolutely chaotic. People gasped, someone screamed. I heard programs hitting the floor as people dropped them in shock. My father's face went completely white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Linda actually stumbled backward and grabbed onto the altar for support. "Hello, everyone," I said, walking slowly down the center aisle. "Sorry I'm late to my own funeral." The crowd was in complete chaos. People were standing up, turning around, pointing at me with shaking hands. I heard whispers of, "Is that really her? And how is this possible?" I kept my eyes on my father as I approached the front. He still hadn't moved or spoken. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, which I guess he was. "You know, Dad," I said when I reached the altar, "I have to say I'm impressed. This is quite a turnout, although I'm a little hurt that you started without me." Finally, he found his voice. "Sarah? But how are you?" "Alive," I finished. "Yeah, surprisingly enough, I am, which is more than I can say for the daughter you've been mourning for 3 months." The church was dead silent now. Everyone was staring at us, trying to understand what was happening. I turned to address the crowd. "I'm sorry to interrupt this lovely service, but I thought you should know that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I was in a car accident 3 months ago and was in a coma for quite a while, but I've been awake and recovering for weeks." I looked back at my father. The interesting thing is, my father never bothered to check on me, never visited, never called the hospital. When they called him, he said he couldn't afford to come see me. My father's face was getting redder. Sarah, this isn't the place for this. These people are here to honor your memory. My memory? I actually laughed. Dad, I'm standing right here. The only memory being honored here is the fake one you created of a dead daughter whose death made you rich. I pulled out the paperwork I'd brought. While I was unconscious, my father collected my life insurance money, cleaned out my bank accounts, sold my belongings, and filed to steal my grandmother's house. The crowd was murmuring, looking at my father with growing suspicion. But wait, there's more, I continued. This memorial fund? All those donations you've been making? They're not going to train nurses. They're going straight into his pocket. Mrs. Henderson stood up. David, is this true? My father tried to deny everything, claiming I was confused for my injuries. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo Maria had taken of me in the hospital weeks ago, with a newspaper showing the date. If you had bothered to call the hospital, they would have told you I had woken up, I said. The truth was sinking in for everyone. The whispers were getting louder and definitely not sympathetic anymore. My father made one last desperate attempt. Sarah, you're sick. This accident has affected your mind. You're right, I said. I am sick. I'm sick of being treated like I don't matter. I'm sick of being lied about and stolen from. And I'm sick of watching you profit from my supposed death. I turned to the crowd again. If anyone wants their donations back, I'll be outside after this. Because I can promise you, not one penny was going to help anyone but my father. The church erupted in chaos. I heard one man say, I want my $100 back. And several people nodded angrily. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out bank records showing my father had stolen over $50,000 from my grandmother while she was dying. So yes, I did threaten to report him because what he did was a crime. And what he's done to me, collecting insurance on a living person, stealing my assets, defrauding all of you, those are crimes too. My father was backing away, his face showing rage and panic. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can, I said. Because while you thought I was safely dead, I've been working with a lawyer. Everything has been documented and reported to the authorities. As if on cue, I heard sirens outside. Police cars were pulling up. My father heard them too, and for the first time looked truly afraid. You orchestrated this whole thing, he said, pointing at me. I orchestrated nothing, I replied. I simply refused to stay dead for your convenience. Detective Williams entered and arrested my father for insurance fraud, theft, and identity fraud. As they cuffed him, he kept shouting that I was mentally ill and couldn't be trusted. Linda followed, crying and claiming she knew nothing. Sure, Linda. After they were gone, the strangest thing happened. Instead of everyone leaving, people started coming up to me. Mr. Peterson said, your grandmother would be so proud of you for standing up to him. People apologized for believing my father's lies, asked how to get their donations back, and many just hugged me and said they were glad I was alive. As people filed out, I stood there among the funeral flowers meant for me. It was surreal, but also liberating, like I'd been reborn. Final update. So remember those 13 missed calls I mentioned at the beginning? Here's what happened, and honestly, it's the most terrifying part of this whole story. Thanks for being patient while I processed everything. I needed a few days to make sure I was safe before sharing this final part. I woke up Sunday morning to my phone buzzing nonstop. 13 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, 5 voicemails from Maria sounding panicked, and 3 texts from Detective Williams saying, call me immediately. My first thought was that something had happened to my father in jail. I was wrong. Something much worse had happened. Apparently, after his arrest, my father had made his one phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to Linda, but to his brother Tony, my uncle who has what you might call anger management issues and a criminal record. The police had intercepted messages showing that my father had given Tony my new address and told him I needed to be taught a lesson about family loyalty. Tony and 2 of his friends were planning to pay me a visit that very morning. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm sharing the story with you guys. The only reason I'm safe right now is because people cared enough to warn me. Maria, Detective Williams, even some of the people from the church had been calling all morning because they'd heard rumors. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. I returned to nursing at a different hospital in a different city. I wanted a fresh start where my father's lies couldn't follow me. Maria and I stayed close. She literally saved my life in more ways than one. Sometimes people ask if I regret the dramatic confrontation at the church. They say I could have just reported the crimes without the public scene. Honestly, I don't regret it for a second. Those people needed to see the truth. They needed to understand that the man they were comforting was the same man who let his daughter stay dead for money. And I needed to look my father in the eye and tell him that I was worth more than his greed. I still have the newspaper clipping with my obituary. I keep it as a reminder of the day I died and came back to life. Because sometimes the only way to truly live is to survive your own death. My father thought he could profit from my death, but all he really did was teach me how strong I actually was. And honestly, that's a lesson I'll never forget. The craziest part is that people still come up to me sometimes and are like, wait, aren't you supposed to be dead? And I'm like, plot twist. I got better. Life's weird, you guys, but I'm living proof that sometimes the best revenge is just not being dead when someone wants you to be. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily content here on Viral Family Tales. We drop new stories about family drama, betrayal, and ultimate comebacks every single day. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have had the guts to crash your own funeral? And if you have your own family drama story, send it our way through the link in the description. Remember, we upload fresh content daily, so make sure you're subscribed and ready for tomorrow's story. Until next time, keep standing up for yourselves.